This sounds more like a creative writing exercise than reality, but let's go with it for a few minutes. Betting markets are giving the United States invading Greenland about a 10% chance, which from the perspective of 2026 me seems too high, and from the perspective of 2024 me seems way too high. So let's throw all sense out of the window and try it out. If the Trump administration were to invade Greenland, what would happen next? Well, the answer tells us something about how democratic transparency works, how Western economic interdependence is constructed, and what the security situation looks like in the Arctic more broadly, because it is better that we have this conversation now than if someone else were to replicate the experience later. So as I'm walking through this scenario with Trump at the helm of an invading army, keep a certain someone else in the back of your mind, and maybe you can see where I am going with this. Okay, as a starting point, if you want to invade Greenland, you just kind of do. Maybe get a couple of carrier strike groups together, pair them with some additional submarines for cover, and have them set sail for Greenland, and then just declare it as yours. Done. It is as simple as that, more or less. That is what happens when you have an island that is roughly the size of Saudi Arabia, but only has a population under 57,000 people. Denmark, responsible for Greenland's military defense, would not be able to put up much of a fight. Its first naval squadron consists of 4 frigates, 3 patrol ships, and a royal yacht. They would be quickly dispatched if a naval battle ever took place. One wonders how the American petty officer second class who took this photo would feel about the whole situation. Terrestrial defenses, at least for the moment, would not be an issue either. Denmark has a few facilities under its Joint Arctic Command, but their complements number in the hundreds. The more serious question would be what to do with Nuuk, Greenland's capital, and the only population center on the island worth speaking of. Maybe you hardly bother with it, because you do not really need to control the city, and because enslaving the population is not what makes Greenland potentially valuable. Or maybe you throw them some hats and hope that economic concessions would buy their compliance, even if their full support is not forthcoming. Perhaps they will switch to chanting "Make America Great Again" instead of "Make America Go Away." Of course, there are significant questions about what this looks like after the fact. It goes without saying that Greenland is super remote, and so no one is physically present in most places to complain about your occupation. Actually, how you occupy vast expanses of nothingness is an equally valid question. It reminds me a bit of science fiction stories where there is some kind of military conflict on the moon, except the moon is often much warmer. Regardless, given Greenland's current defensive allocations, the military segment is not the hard part. The hard part is doing this without completely breaking your own country in the meantime. There are 5 points of discussion here: leaks, trade warfare, fiscal warfare, besieged bases, and a constitutional crisis. And again, as I'm going through these, keep that certain someone in the back of your mind to see if you can catch what I'm doing here. For the first drawback, it is almost impossible to think that such an operation could happen without everyone knowing about it ahead of time. We are talking about moving a massive amount of metal and large crew complements to go with the ships. Hundreds or thousands of people would have to be looped into the operation, either directly or indirectly by those with half of a brain piecing together their need-to-know information. A majority of them would either view the operation as illegal or immoral. You would start to see mass resignations, especially at the top of the military chain of command. The press would get a hold of it and keep it as the top story for a week. I would go from publishing 1 video a day this month to 2 videos a day next month. Please no. Fun fact, multiple press outlets knew about the special Maduro operation ahead of time. They did not report on it, though, because it did not plainly break any laws, and it would have endangered the lives of service members. The media would not have the same reservation about leaking an invasion of Greenland. This, incidentally, is why I have stayed comparatively calm even as the Greenland headlines are coming. I would be absolutely shocked one day to wake up and discover that it has already happened, without having any hint of it from the week before. Not cheap threats from the White House, but actual military plans. and I would not take any discussion of it seriously until we start getting credible leaks on the subject. Second, the United States would risk instantly falling into a recession, and more likely a depression if Europe really tries. Overnight, trade with Europe could end, and it is not just $700 billion in exports to Europe that the United States loses. It is also like half of the global supply chains. Anything that is not a simple product either stops getting produced or falls under endless delay. It will make what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic look like a joke. It would make Americans beg to return to the merely elevated levels of inflation seen during the Biden administration, which is in large part how Trump got back into office in the first place. Heck, I'm not even sure China would be supportive of this despite it representing the severing of the world's most powerful alliance. The global economy will tank as well under the weight of all of this. Obviously, cutting trade would be enormously costly for Europe too, leading to questions of whether the individual governments would approve of the measure. It would feel like the economic equivalent of mutually assured destruction. However, European citizens will be so fed up with the United States that they will want to participate regardless of what their governments mandate. Moreover, there will be plenty of people inside of the United States who will be sympathetic to their cause. Europe will want to give them extra incentive to protest their government to press to revert the policy. It is one of the main mechanisms behind economic sanctions. Third, Europe holds about $3.6 trillion in U.S. treasuries, about 40% of all foreign holdings. The ownership is mixed between public and private entities, but either way, that is liable to get liquidated. Europe takes a significant loss as a result, but the decreased global demand for U.S. debt causes borrowing rates for the United States to spike. A budget crisis erupts, as no one in Congress anticipated having to pay so much more to service the national debt. European countries begin to sell off the dollar from their foreign currency reserves. Other countries follow suit, partially having lost faith in the United States, and partially because of the loss of Europe's faith in the United States. The dollar as the world's default currency comes into question. Fourth, the United States has something along the lines of 40 military bases in Europe. All of them become quarantined. Europe does not want to get into a shooting war over them, but their hosts refuse to allow any replenishments. The United States is allowed to pack up everything and go home. Other bases in Africa and the Middle East fall under strain, as they relied on logistics from the European bases. Finally, a constitutional crisis arises back in Washington. Democrats unanimously vote to impeach the president. Assuming this all happens in 2026, they likely find 3 Republican votes needed to pass the measure without difficulty. If this is 2027, the Democrats do it by themselves, and perhaps add more Republicans who see no point in supporting a lame duck president. Things get more complicated in the Senate, where Democrats again unanimously vote to convict him. Depending on the American public's reaction, maybe they find the 20 Republicans necessary for the 2/3 majority. If this is 2027, they will still need significant Republican support, but perhaps not the full 20 for a conviction. Maybe then Trump refuses to leave office, sending us into a deeper crisis. Maybe J.D. Vance realizes that this is his one and only opportunity to become president. He calculates that his electoral odds in 2028 are now shot because of his ties to the administration. So he finds the nearest judge to administer the oath of office and forcibly removes Trump from the West Wing. Or maybe enough Republicans stay in line and acquit the president. Either way, expansion of the United States requires a federal law endorsed by Congress, and so we are back to a constitutional crisis in another form. Oh, and maybe at the end of this, Europe does not bother trying to recover Greenland. After all, the European Union is primarily a trade bloc. Its de facto military arm is NATO. NATO operates under unanimous consensus, and the United States would make that a problem. There is also no mechanism to expel a member, so don't get any ideas there. Or maybe the continent decides to send a military force right back. Who knows? Either way, the United States has already lost before a true war ever started. And maybe I have been overly dramatic about some of the consequences here. But Greenland, while valuable and strategically important, is not that valuable or strategically important. and you only need about a quarter or so of the consequences I just mentioned for the whole enterprise to break apart. The thing is that this is a game of chicken, and Europe has the structural advantage of having the status quo in the continent's favor. It requires Trump to send things over the edge, and you know what happens when Trump plays a game of chicken when he does not have the cards. But, as always, I do not claim to understand exactly what is going on in Trump's mind, so don't at me if something does go off the rails. Now, as ridiculous as that exercise was, I did have a deeper point here. Imagine that it is 10 years from now, when there may be more direct value for possessing Greenland, thank you ice caps melting, and the aggressor is not the United States. It is Russia. Russia builds up the rough equivalent of the naval firepower that the United States had in our thought experiment, and quietly sets sail for Greenland. No one leaks it to the press ahead of time, because media controls in Russia are tighter, and no one there has any qualms about the operation. In fact, we have previously discussed how the lack of media guardrails contributed to the failed invasion of Kyiv back in 2022. Because these are naval ships simply engaged in a pre-planned simulated wargame, and moreover, the fleet is not nearly the size of what was mobilized to the north of Ukraine 4 years ago. No one in the West realizes Russia's true intentions until it is too late. Russia takes the island with little resistance, and when the occupation forces encounter civil disobedience and nuke, half the population disappears. The rest fall in line. The West thinks about cutting all trade with Russia, but then realizes that almost all of the bilateral trade ended back in 2022. The West considers selling Russian treasuries and liquidating all of their reserve rubles, but nope, none of them were silly enough to own those in the first place. I will not even bother to suggest that Russia is expelled from its non-existent European military bases. And rather than there being a constitutional crisis back in Moscow, Putin is hailed on the streets for his masterclass in geopolitical strategy. Ukraine might not have gone as he anticipated, but adding Greenland to the Federation will grant him the historical legacy that he has always sought. I mean, have you seen how big it is on a Mercator projection? There are some complications here to be sure, such as whether you do not bother to attack Badufik Space Base and lay siege to it instead. The point is, if the United States can walk right into Greenland, then it would not be too complicated for someone else to. If this sounds even slightly plausible to you, it is because Russia has used this exact fait accompli strategy before. You just take the thing and have everyone else ask questions later. Previously, it was Crimea. Next decade, it could be Greenland. And in theory, what is supposed to stop that from happening is NATO's Article 5 clause. And yeah, Article 5 is great, but it is much better to provide for the common defense as there is an ongoing battle for the object at stake. It is much harder to provide for the common defense when that means trying to unstick Russia from the premises. You can imagine a handful of allies being reluctant to contribute to a counterforce to invade occupied Greenland. You can imagine a handful more potentially refusing to strike Russia elsewhere as a counter-value punishment for the action. So if you want Article 5 to deter Russia properly, there needs to be some amount of defense constructed in Greenland between now and then, going far beyond the token bases that the United States and Denmark already have, and likely yet more than what was the case during the Cold War. Have there be NATO troops under duress with an ongoing battle, which necessitates assistance or risks their capture. Basically, make it the same story as the Baltic countries. Do not plan for them to be completely taken over before the North Atlantic Council meets. Fortify the border now. When the battle begins, have them dig in and wait for the Allies to send help. Discuss amongst yourselves who should be paying for those proactive defenses in Greenland. As for me, for the third time, I am going down to the Winchester. I am having a nice cold pint, and I am waiting for all of this to blow over. And I swear, if any of you interrupt me again with this nonsense, I'm going back to telling you about my books. For now, I produced a feature-length video on the structure of the Western Economic Order about a year ago that has increased relevance now. Go check it out. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.